tobacco birds than is suspected.
Let's get right to our panel. Democratic strategist Angela Rye joins us in Washington, and here with me in New York is my colleague and the co-host of the cycle, Crystal Ball. Crystal, there you had it. Michele Bachmann, chair of the Congressional Tea Party caucus, will not run for re-election. So the first question, who has the Lord ordained to take over as the leader of the Tea Party movement?
Well, I would say if you're looking for that Bachmann-esque mix of willful lack of
lunacy, lying.
Yes, conspiracy theories, all of the above. I would submit that Louis Gohmert of Texas is a potentially good choice. He's had a lot of...
He is certainly in the leading pack, but there are some who are running in pretty close. I mean, what's the gentleman from Iowa called?
Steve King.
Steve King.
Steve King is another good one. I mean, there's a lot of good choices out there.
Right.
I will say one thing that's interesting about Michele Bachmann moving on is she really never had that sort of establishment institutional support, right? She was the Tea Party candidate. She demonstrated that you could raise a whole lot of money being sort of this Tea Party ideological star. But once your star fades, where does that leave you? Obviously, it wasn't enough to run a credible presidential campaign. Wasn't enough to ultimately, it didn't look good for her holding on to her seat, which is quite a Republican seat. So it shows the limits of that approach of sort of celebrity, politician, outsider, anti-establishment candidate.
Right. Angela, earlier today a lawsuit was filed on behalf of 25 Tea Party and conservative organizations against the IRS. And in the aftermath of the IRS scandal, it actually seemed there was a hint of sympathy for Tea Party groups who'd been targeted. But with the imminent loss of one of their biggest stars, and more importantly, one of their biggest fundraisers, is the Tea Party movement once again in some difficulties?
No, I think they have a ton of other folks who are just as willing to spew out conspiracy theories for the sake of taking the country back from whom is a question I think that we really need to start asking. But I don't think that they'll be at much risk. There are folks that continue to believe that the Constitution is in some grave jeopardy, that they need to continue to fight for fiscal solvency and the other things that they use as detractors. And then you have to wonder who will take her place in, creating the opportunity for the 38 votes to repeal Obamacare in the House, as well as maybe who will break the Guinness Book of World Records for the most number of Pinocchios on PolitiFact.
Yes.
So there are a lot of other questions we've got to ask.
That's very, very good, and I love the way you put that, Angela. Now, Crystal, Ted Cruz, he is going to be speaking in New York tonight at a Republican fundraiser. Peter King says he's not going to attend because he voted against Hurricane Sandy relief. Isn't Ted Cruz actually as extreme philosophically, but more dangerous because he's much more central within the Republican Party?
He is trying to actually use the sort of mechanisms of power that exist to go through the established channels, and I think you're right. I think he is more dangerous. I think he has a broader chance of getting that libertarian support that, say, Rand Paul is also courting, and trying to do it in more of a mainstream way, even though his views are just as ideological and just as out there as Michele Bachmann. So.
But he's also causing trouble within the Republican Party with people like John McCain calling him a wacko bird and not liking him and not feeling that he's working, particularly on the issue of the budget. So Cruz, while he espouses many of the philosophical positions that Michele Bachmann does, is actually potentially more problematic going forward, isn't he?
Well, and I think there is perhaps less tolerance within the Republican Party for a senator who is as extreme and as ideological as Ted Cruz is in the House. A sense of, well, we've got a lot of House members, she's just one of them. In the Senate, someone like John McCain, who's been there a long time and takes the institution seriously, has a deeper sense of responsibility when someone is so far out on the wings as Ted Cruz is there.
What's your view, Angela, of Mr. Cruz?
Ted Cruz is a huge challenge. Again, when you think about what he came in with, he created a great number of problems with the Republican folks that have been there for a long time. On both sides of the aisle, he was criticized, whether it was for trying to get attention too quickly by any means necessary or for whatever other reason. Ted Cruz caused a number of problems, both in hearings, both on the Senate floor and behind closed doors.
Okay. Well, speaking of the future of the GOP, we can't ignore Governor Christie, who once again spent spent some time earlier this week with his closest friend, the president. But is Governor Christie's bipartisan approach and geniality towards the president, I start with you, Angela, the very thing that will prevent him from ever becoming a darling of the Tea Party?
I think a darling of the Tea Party, yes, but as soon as the Republican Party, and I'm saying that, you know, being very hopeful and optimistic, as soon as they can realize that bipartisanship is the way to solve not only this country's woes, but also their own, I think that they'll see that Christie is a great ally for them. But in the meantime, and in between time, all their focus on the bromance and everything else and the way in which they make fun of, you know, him trying to get relief for an area that was so severely impacted within his state, I think that they're so off base, and it's really unfortunate. They really got to get it together, Martin.
Christie.
Chris Christie really, he sort of was a darling of the Tea Party when he was best known for yelling at unionized teachers.
And when he cancelled the rail project because he said there wasn't enough funds to pay for it.
They loved
was a hero.
him then.
Right.
And I would say after he gets reelected in New Jersey this year, which is likely to happen, he will probably go back to some of those more conservative-leaning tendencies. And I think they like his tone. I think they like the fact that they could see him sticking it to the president or sticking it to any Democrat. And when he comes back out with that, I think conservatives will fall back in love with Chris Christie, is my prediction.
Indeed. Democratic strategist Angela Ryan and Crystal Ball, thank you both for your great insight.
Thank you.
Coming up, it's the mad science of the national debt. We'll explain straight ahead.